that Texans game, it was like, okay, here we go. Like, he's finally starting to come on, and the Colts look like they're ready for the playoff race. And then the Patriots game happens the next week, which was arguably one of the worst quarterback performances I've ever seen. It was so bad. It was terrible. And then I want to say the Cardinals game came soon after, and he had one good drive in that entire game. Outside of that, it was just a tough showing. And then those last two games were just abysmal. Everyone saw the Jaguars game. I'm not trying to let the rest of the team off the hook, but there's no excuse to getting blown out by the worst team in football.
What is his numbers not telling us?
So a couple things that I think stand out more than what the numbers. His low interception rate, he always has. I think he was like 12th in turnover-worthy plays, but he was like near the bottom of the league in actual turnovers.
So what about as a counter, just to get an understanding, did the Colts have the weapons? Obviously, T.Y. was hurt. He was banged up, so inconsistent in terms of his availability.
It wasn't great. I'm not going to sit here and say Indy's receivers are amazing. I mean, Michael Pittman Jr., I think, had like almost a 30% target share as their wide receiver one. He did a lot of the deep stuff. He did a lot of the underneath and intermediate stuff as well. Yeah, the Colts don't have those type of deep threats, and that's definitely a big area that need to address. But it was just a tough fit in this offense with the way that he wants to play.
At the end of the day, can you consistently win and contend with a quarterback like Carson Wentz? Not in spite of, not because of, but can you win with a quarterback like Carson Wentz?
What are we contending for?
Okay, let's do it this way. For Washington's sake, can we contend for division titles in divisional round, like baby steps for us? I'm not going to sit here and talk about Super Bowl. Let's talk baby steps. Can we get to divisional round and possibly a peek at an NFC title game? What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of the Trap or Die podcast, provided to you by 214 Media. I am your host, Mual. Dre and AJ on here today. It's a weird time that we're recording, because it's the only time that we've really recorded on this show. We usually do things live, but yes, it is solo with my good man Zach Hicks of Sports Illustrated, who covers the Indianapolis Colts for Sports Illustrated as well. He is their lead analyst, and he's going to talk a little Carson Wentz with us today. Carson. Zach, how you doing today, big dog? I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, I'm doing all right, man. Don't call me Carson, okay? We're gonna after we get done this conversation, I don't know if that'll be cool,
Well, look, First off, I guess I kind of got used to it talking all day to Washington fans, and obviously introducing you, knowing what we're about to talk about. It's a mixed bag, the results I've gotten today, asking them about their feelings or ideas of Carson Wentz being a Washington Commander. But let's start with the most important question off the top. Do you think the Colts will have ultimately regret trading for Carson Wentz last year?
I kind of think they do. The Colts had a tough situation to navigate. They had another quarterback retire on them with Phillip Rivers. Now, obviously, it's more understandable for Phillip Rivers to retire than it was with Andrew Luck a couple years earlier. So they kind of had to find another Band-Aid, because they have a roster that's ready to compete, and they probably overpaid. At the time, it was definitely an overpay, and I think when you look at how the season ended for the Colts, it certainly looks like an even bigger overpay. It's tough, though, because now you're coming off of a year where, you had a year with this quarterback in a wide open AFC with a good roster. You missed the playoffs. He's a 30-something year. He's about to be 30 years old. And you don't know if your team can really take a positive step with him. So, the Carson Wentz era might be over in Indy. It might still be going on, but I do think at the moment, the Colts front office and maybe even the coaching staff kind of does regret that kind of trade right now.
One of the concerns that we had, as I said, I asked this question to the Commander fans, and it's gonna be so weird saying that, Commander fans. I still say
The
Skins
commies.
fans, by the way. Yeah, all that stuff. Right. But one of the concerns, and I guess the biggest concern is outside of injury, is just what's going on, y'all. This is Mual, your host of the Trap or Die podcast, and I'm just here to tell you, man, while you're here, if you're new, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow us, man, as we continue to push out this content and create some things for the Washington Commanders and the NFL, man. But mainly the Commanders. This is a Washington channel. I want everybody to be involved. I want everybody to catch these live streams weekly. I want everybody to be a part of this growth that we got going on over here, man. So if you're here, if you're new, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you stay tuned, man, for much more content, fire content, and as we keep things pushing, man. So yeah, get to it. We appreciate it. All that good stuff. Peace. Him performing when it matters, I guess. And I'll just hand it to you. The month of January was a disaster for Indy and Carson Wentz. 9-6 heading into the final 2 games of the year. Things look pretty good. You just really needed a game to get into the playoffs, and you finished the season at 9-8. What the hell happened to Carson Wentz in the Colts' biggest games?
Look, man, if you can figure it out, I'd all ears because it's crazy. I made a video for our site's YouTube channel. It was after the Texans game. So the Colts basically they barely lost to the Bucks in just a really tough fashion, and then they blew out the Texans. And I made a video saying like Carson Wentz is finally starting to turn the corner. Like we saw some inconsistencies with the injuries early in the season, but that Texans game, it was like, okay, here we go. Like he's finally starting to come on, and the Colts look like they're ready for the playoff race. And then the Patriots game happens the next week, which was arguably one of the worst quarterback performances I've ever seen. It was so bad. It was terrible. And then I want to say the Cardinals game came soon after, and he had one good drive in that entire game. Outside of that, it was just a tough showing. And then those last 2 games were just abysmal. Everyone saw the Jaguars game. I'm not trying to let the rest of the team off the hook, but there's no excuse to getting blown out by the worst team in football in a win-and-in playoff game in the last game of the season. And the Raiders game the week before that was just as bad. So, I don't know what happened to him. It was just a monumental collapse where his play went from trending in the right direction to completely bottoming out. And it was just, it cost. I mean, it's not just him, but his play dropping off so significantly in that last month of the season is a big factor why the Colts did not make the playoffs.
So before we get into the cap situation for the Colts and things like that, you hit on this twice already, and you said you thought that he was turning the corner within the offense. And I think the thing is when you look at his numbers on the surface, because I guess we can get into it now. When you look at the numbers on the surface, I mean, 27 touchdowns, I think 7 interceptions, something like that. Mm-hmm. Efficient in that regard in terms of TD to INT ratio, decent amount of yards, respectable completion percentage. But then you see opinions like turning the corner, like he's not there yet. What was it that what you saw was positive in Carson Wentz? What was the positive? But then also when you look at the situation in those last 2 games, what was it that encompassed who he was in terms of the downside of Carson Wentz?
Yeah, so I mean, talking about the positives, I mean, we're talking about the guy from 2020 was arguably the worst quarterback in the entire league. 2020, his season was downright awful.
He led the league in interceptions that year.
Yeah, and he
in
was
8 games played.
He was benched and he led the league in interceptions. It was a downright awful season. So just seeing him bounce back mechanically to the point where even me talking like this, he was still pretty much a league average quarterback in the whole, maybe a slightly below average, but that's around what he was on the year. He was able to make some big plays. He was able to make some big throws. But the pitfalls of Carson Wentz ultimately come down to he's just so volatile, and it's not game to game. It's not quarter to quarter. It could be snap to snap. You could be getting the best quarterback in the league one snap and then the worst quarterback in the league the next snap, or from one drive to the next drive. You don't know when it's going to bottom out. And unfortunately for the Colts, it happened throughout the entire last month of the season. It wasn't just like a one bad game or one bad quarter. He had like one good quarter of play in an entire month. So it's really just, if this were a 21 or 22-year-old quarterback, you could sit with yourself and be like, okay, inconsistencies happen, but he's got to clean that up. But we're talking about a guy who's about to be 30. It's not like at some point you got to say like this is just who the guy is at this point. And I think that's what you're getting with Carson Wentz, where it's like you'll get some highlight throws. I mean, if you stack his five or six best throws of the season against every other quarterback, it looks like he belongs with the elite tier. I mean, some of his best throws are some of the best in the league.
I saw the one you posted against the Niners.
The Niners one was great.
That was one of his best throws.
Yeah, the Niners one was great. He had an amazing one against the Cardinals. Had a deep hole shot to T.Y. Hilton. That was like a post between the two high safeties. Like he throws some really, really nice balls, but you just don't get enough of that. And you don't get enough of it to excuse some of the boneheaded mistakes, some of the just super easy misses, and where he'll take a sack on a third down when he had an underneath option because he's so focused looking down the field. These are mistakes that as a 30-year-old quarterback, you can't be making these type of mistakes. And that's ultimately where we saw the Colts kind of fall apart down the stretch, as those mistakes just kept compounding and got worse and worse. But, overall, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just trashing on the guy. I think he's a league average quarterback who does a lot of good things, makes some big things happen. But at the end of the day, he's so volatile that it's hard to put faith in him to run your offense.
So now to the cap number and the actual situation. Let's get you on the record right here, Zach. Yes or no, in your opinion, is the Indianapolis Colts moving on from Carson after, or I guess once it's finally here in the offseason? Because we're not fully here yet. So
yeah, man, it is so tough. I could see them going either way. On one hand, it's so hard to admit you're wrong a year after trading a first and third round pick for a guy. Because we know these teams, they're stubborn. They're so stubborn. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time.
Personalities, like they're not gonna admit they're wrong until like it's evident. Like there's still ambiguity there.
They'll go down with the ship. They'll go down with the ship. So it's hard to admit you're wrong, especially because it looks like a major black eye, which it would be. But the thing that could be worse, don't make one black eye until two black eyes by continuing it, or something like that. So I could see either way. I think they'll try to upgrade. I think they'll try to get another person in. But if I had to lean one way, I'd ultimately say they go for another year with him, especially because, like you're about to bring up probably with the contract, the out doesn't really come in until after this next season when it comes to cutting him. Now,
you know, speak on it. Yep.
Yeah. So I think if they cut him this year, it's like 14 or 15 million in dead cap.
15,
I believe.
Yep.
15. And then I think it's zero after this next year.
Absolutely.
So they, unless they get a good offer.
One thing. Yeah, a good offer. So here's one thing. Now, relatively speaking, so let's do a quick comparison, right? 15 mil is like on the surface a lot of money, but when you compare it to a person like Russell Wilson, who wants out of Seattle, you're looking at like 20 something, maybe even 30 dead cap. So relatively speaking, you do kind of get away with it if you wanted to move on from Carson. And my thing is, like you said, if you have, well, I guess the important thing or the next question would be for it to make sense for Carson to be traded, who would be the contingency plans? I saw one of your articles and you listed a couple guys, some familiar names that Washington fans are eyeing. But I want to get your thoughts on the contingency plans if they were to move on from Carson, if it were to make sense for them.
One thing that we have in common as a fan base right now is we all know it's a tough year to need a quarterback. Every year it's a tough year to need a quarterback.
Yes.
I grew up a Washington fan, so
you know better.
I lived it. I lived it, man.
Yes.
But I think the most obvious and likely and just easy option for Indy would be Marcus Mariota. I do know that they were considering trading for him before they ultimately pulled the trigger on Carson Wentz. And I think, would Mariota be an upgrade over Carson Wentz? Probably not anything significantly or whatever, but I think what it would do is it would clean up just the volatility of Carson Wentz. You would get a guy who maybe the ceiling's a lot lower, but also the floor is a lot higher. So if they wanted to go that way, I could definitely see that. But it's tough. The draft is one option. Russell Wilson. I know everyone wants to get a piece of Russell Wilson, but
yes, they do.
I don't know if he's actually going to get traded. It's so like, when have we ever seen a quarterback of that caliber be traded? I know it's we hear it every offseason with him now. Oh, he wants out. The Seahawks are going to trade him, and then he stays in Seattle. So, you got to hit on these guys in the draft, and this year is not the year to draft one either. So, I don't know, man. It's tough.
It's messy. And
it is.
Just a quick thing about Washington, because you're familiar. It's just so crazy how every time they're in need of a quarterback, which they are typically every year, it's never the right year for it. Like, it's never the right year for something. Like, you make a move for Alex Smith when you could have did something in the draft, or you make a move sticking with Dwayne Haskins in 2019, or excuse me, in 2020 when Ron gets here, when you could have went in the draft and got a guy and moved on from Dwayne. It's just kind of crazy, the situations that they put themselves in on Washington's side. But we talked about it. Clearly, Chris Ballard, we know, wouldn't commit to Carson in 2022. We don't have to talk about the cap number itself, but why would he not consider it or consider committing at that moment in January when he had that pressure with the media? Would it be strictly performance based, or are there other things that we may not be thinking of for why he wouldn't commit to Carson Wentz?
Yeah, as much as I can say it's going to be performance based, I mean, the level of play just wasn't there down the stretch. I can't really speak too much to the locker room stuff. It's just so hard to speculate on that when you're not like in there every single day. I will just say, and this is completely my opinion, this is no source or anything like that. The locker room that the Colts have built has been very like underdog mentality, underdog working for everything. I mean, you look at guys like Darius Leonard and Kenny Moore, two Pro Bowl, or, Darius Leonard's case, an All Pro, who kind of came from very small schools and had to kind of work their way up to this. And if we look at anything from the stuff that unraveled in Philly before Carson Wentz left, it was a lot of him being coddled, him being kind of protected, and then being really soft on him. So purely speculative for me, not, nothing source wise. Maybe that wasn't a great fit in the locker room, bringing in a guy who, there are reports of him being coddled or him being kind of treated a different way into a locker room with a lot of guys who had to kind of work for everything, or kind of, those blue collar types. That could have been an issue, but I don't know. It's really hard to really speak about a locker room, but I would assume most of it had to do with the on the field play. I mean, again, it just wasn't where it needed to be down the stretch.
Okay, and I'd be remiss, and everybody who knows me knows that I butcher words a lot. So if I said it wrong, forgive me. But I'm gonna say it anyway. I'd be remiss if I don't ask you directly about that. The character or potential weakness from Carson Wentz. There's been speculation over the years through his exit in Philly, and then even early on during his stint with Indianapolis, like around August or July, there's been concerns about not necessarily a character, like a toxic type of thing, but the word selfish and lack of leadership has been associated with them. So I'll just hand it to you again. Just like I said, I have to be direct. Do you know anything about this or anything in relation to this during his time with the Indianapolis Colts?
Yeah, I think the article you're referring to is from an Indy Star reporter when they were kind of going after him for not for his vaccination status, essentially, for being unvaccinated.
Yes.
And, keeping that a whole debate, because, I mean, the last thing I guess you even need, or anybody really needs, is get into more debates and arguments about that kind of stuff. I personally didn't hear anything, awful or about, but it's so hard to tell. I mean, even if the locker room loves them, we've seen the Colts, a guy, for example, Jacoby Brissett, the locker room loved him. Great locker room guy, outstanding human being. And when it came time to move on, the Colts moved on from him, and it didn't really care how the locker room felt. So the locker room could absolutely love Carson Wentz, and it still would be a performance thing if they moved on. It's just tough. I know it's a checkered. I don't want to say it's like a checkered past with Carson Wentz, but we do hear a lot of rumblings from Philly media, mostly from his time in Philly and how that ended. And I'm sure there are going to be some things that people say about his time in Indy too. I just don't like speculating on character. It's tough, man.
Completely fair. Completely fair.
Because, I mean, these guys are under a microscope. It's tough.
And it's even worse. It's harder because I understand how COVID works too, in the sense of how it impacts reporters and even media, because you're not even able to be in the locker room anymore. Like a lot of things are done virtually, if not at a distance when you're in practice talking to players or talking to coaches at the podium. So I get it. It's hard, man. And I think one of the things when it comes to Carson, and it's just an opinion, a quick statement, is just sometimes those things are unfair and sometimes those things are hit jobs because of like one little nugget that they heard from like 2 players out of 20 that they talked to and stuff like that. So it does get hard, but I think you took you gave the proper response. It's messy, man. You stayed away from it. All right. So Frank Reich, he was obviously Carson Wentz OC of the first 2 seasons in the league. And has been Indy's head coach for 5 seasons now. In Philly, there were concerns about his confidence and skill set when Reich left because his production and decision-making began to decrease as the years moved on, seemingly that he may have been regressing. What's your opinion on the importance of that relationship for Wentz? Does he need to be in a Reich's system or philosophy in order for him to succeed in the NFL? What is your opinion on that?
I don't think he really needs it. Arguably, in my opinion here, I think 2018 was Wentz's best season. I felt that was better than his 2017 season. 2017 was just there were so many historical trends that were not going to repeat themselves off of his 2017 season. And so 2018, Frank Reich's gone. And he has another really strong season, albeit in only like 12 games. And I think 2019 was a fairly solid season too. So, I mean, he's had 2 good seasons, or 2 at least adequate seasons away from Frank Reich. So I don't think he necessarily needs that relationship. But it certainly helped his game going back to that this past year. Because again, 2020, one of the worst quarterback seasons we've seen in a while. In this past year, for all the bad things I've said on this show so far about him, it was an adequate season. And I think if anyone told you that watching the 2020 disaster that was Carson Wentz, that he was going to be adequate in 2021, it's like, all right, cool, we'll take it, So I think getting back to that relationship, getting back to similar things that he had success with in the past did help him. But I don't think they were enough to kind of cover up his flaws and cover up the eventual pitfalls in his game.
Now, we touched on it briefly, and you just talked about it, like covering up his flaws. I'll just say it flat out. What is his numbers not telling us? Like on the surface, again, it looks good. What are the numbers not telling us about who he is? Yes, you say he's volatile, but is there something with his processing ability? Is there something with how he performs in the pocket? We know he loves to cough up the ball. We know that much. And clearly it didn't work out well for him in certain times this year. I know that because I bet on him a few times and it hurts.
Don't do that.
But what is his numbers not telling us, man, that kind of can shed light to the people who may be for or against him, whatever the case may be for them?
Yeah, so a couple things that I think stand out more than what the numbers, his low interception rate, he always has. I think he was like 12th in turnover worthy plays, but he was like near the bottom of the league in actual turnovers. He's very careless with the ball, and this year was a year that he got pretty lucky. I mean, if anyone is interested in watching a game, go back and watch that 49ers game. He threw 4 or 5 passes that bounced off defenders' hands. I'm not saying that he has an insane amount of luck that other quarterbacks don't have, but when you're just looking at that raw number of 7 interceptions, it probably could have or should have been a little bit more, especially with the amount of left-handed passes he makes when he's being tackled in the backfield. And that's another thing too. It's just,
oh my God, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that Titans game, Zach, at the home game against the Titans. The amount of money I had on that game just to see him do what he did at the end of the game, Zach, I lost it. Continue.
Yeah, yeah. There's a small sect of Colts fans who think that that play was Reich's fault for calling a screen towards that close to the goal line, and then Wentz made a heads up play by turning the ball over because then the Colts could get the ball back. If it was a safety, they wouldn't have got the ball back. I'm like, dude, he's not thinking that in the middle of that play.
He's not, and I believe that I believe you when you say there's fans out there who thinks that it's kind of their rationale for why it was such a stupid decision. Like it's so bad that he could have been thinking a little bit outside of the box. No, it was stupid. He shouldn't have done
it. Yeah. But when we're talking about other things, I think just a big thing, like when you look at Phillip Rivers compared to Carson Wentz, right? Phillip Rivers of this offensive line was one of the least pressured and least sacked quarterbacks in the league. Then you have pretty much the same offensive line, except you go from Anthony Costanzo to Eric Fisher. You get the same offensive line. Maybe they miss a couple extra games, but it's not that big a difference. To now the Colts offensive line has allowed near the most pressures in the league, near the most sacks in the league, most quarterback hits. And, a lot of people are thinking it's a lot of that comes down to offensive line. And I'm not saying they were as good as they were in 2020, but you don't have 5 players all of a sudden forget how to play football. Right. Some of that has to come down to that quarterback, especially when a lot of the replacement guys who came in played pretty well. So I think he holds the ball a lot longer. He doesn't recognize blitzes very quick. His processing is just really, it's always just a tad late. It's never like awful. It's just he does not get to his reads when he needs to get to them. And I think a big thing that was said before he came to Indy, and we saw it a lot this year, is he just doesn't throw like drag routes or like underneath. Like he doesn't throw them at all. He will just keep his eyes down the field. He won't come down. He won't come back. I mean, we saw Nyheim Hines go from, I think, the second most catches in the league among running backs last year to barely being a factor in the offense. Jonathan Taylor, I think, only had 2 targets or like 3 targets after week 10 this year. He just does not get down. Well, after week 10, yeah. Like targets in the pass game. Yeah. Like it's just Carson Wentz just does not get down to those options in the pass game at all. So, the stats are good. The stats look fine. If you look just at the stats, it looked fine. And again, there's going to be peak plays where if you look at the stats and you look at the peak plays, you can really sell yourself on them. But when you watch these full games and you see some of the misses he has, you see the offense stall out because he can't properly diagnose where his hot read's going to be on a third down blitz. That's where you kind of get the volatility and you kind of get the sense where it's like, we're like Indy's probably thinking right now, like, man, we got to try to do something here because I don't know how far this will take us.
A couple more questions for you, Zach. The Colts ran the ball the 5th most at 47% this year. And based on Wentz's strengths and obviously his weaknesses, what you know them to be and what you know his strengths to be as well, what do you think fits him in terms of his scheme? What type of scheme fits him? And I'll leave it at that before I get to the follow-up.
I think the perfect coach for him, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen or anything, is the Bruce Arians type, where we're going to chuck the ball deep almost every play, where we're just going to air it out. I think that's Carson Wentz's calling because that's
you just planted a seed in my head. I like that.
Right? That's what we're hoping over here too. But I just think because like Frank Reich's offense is predicated on we're going to chip away. We'll take our shots and we'll run the ball well. But in the passing game, it's going to be a lot of underneath stuff, and we're going to get those quick conversions. That's why Phillip Rivers had such a great final season with the Colts. Why Phillip Rivers was so strong that year. I think he was like 9th in DVOA after a year where everyone called him the noodle arm quarterback that was done. And Carson Wentz didn't fit as well because Carson just wants to air it out. He doesn't want to take those underneath shots. He wants to get the ball down the field. He wants to get out of the pocket and throw it down the field. And I think, a vertical passing game that has good running backs and a good offensive line, I think that would fit him well. I don't know how he can operate offenses like he was fine again this past year, but if you really want to maximize him, you just got to get him airing it out, and you got to have the other players kind of doing the underneath stuff. You can't rely on him to get the ball there because he just won't.
So what about as a counter, just to get an understanding? Did the Colts have the weapons? Obviously, Ty was hurt. He was banged up, so inconsistent in terms of his availability. But did the Colts have that deep threat to actually attack defenses downfield? Was it kind of like unfortunate that Ty was in and out of the lineup because you couldn't attack downfield like you all wanted to? What's the situation in terms of deep threat weapons for Indy?
Yeah, it wasn't great. I'm not going to sit here and say Indy's receivers are amazing. I mean, Michael Pittman Jr., I think, had like almost a 30% target share as their wide receiver one. He did a lot of the deep stuff. He did a lot of the underneath and intermediate stuff as well. They had a couple guys come in and made a couple plays. Paris Campbell had, I think, 2 big deep plays, but he just can't stay healthy. And then Ashton Dooling came in and had a couple as well. But yeah, the Colts don't have those type of deep threats, and that's definitely a big area that need to address. But you know, it was just a tough fit in this offense with the way that he wants to play.
Okay, all right. So given that we all that we talked about in this combo, let's ask flat out right here, Zach. At the end of the day, can you consistently win and contend with a quarterback like Carson Wentz? Not in spite of, not because of, but can you win with a quarterback like Carson Wentz?
What are we contending for?
Okay, let's do it this way. For Washington's sake, can we contend for division titles in divisional round, like baby steps for us? I'm not going to sit here and talk about Super Bowl. Let's talk baby steps. Can we get to division title contention consistently? Can we get to divisional round and possibly a peek at an NFC title game?
I think you'll be in the conversation for all those with a guy like Carson. You can definitely be in the conversation. I think with Carson Wentz, the problem is there's always a chance that you could get a 2020 season with him and it just completely bottoms out. But I think for the most part, you can be a fringe playoff team with Carson Wentz. I'm not going to commit to anything more than that because I don't know if you could be anything more than that with him. I mean, again, if you were to poll, GMs, executives around the NFL about the best built rosters in the league, I think a lot of them would say Indy is up there. Indy's one of the better built rosters in this league. I mean, they have on defense, they have a Pro Bowler at all 3 spots. On offense, they have one of the better offensive lines until this past year, apparently. They have a 1,000-yard receiver. They have one of the best running backs in the league. It's a great roster. And they missed the playoffs in a really wide open AFC race. So I don't know if Wentz gets you much more than contending for the playoffs. Hopefully, if Indy runs it back with him, they can go more than that, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, he needs to redo the way that ended in January, so
yeah.
I get it. All right, last thing, what would it take for Washington to acquire Wentz if it was to go down? Obviously, we know you gave up a first and a third for Carson. Flipping them with an indication that you're ready to move on. I would imagine assets, but I'll leave it up. Draft assets, but I'll leave it up to you. What would it take for Washington to acquire Carson Wentz?
It's tough because again, you could probably sell him to teams off of that, or teams could sell themselves on him off of the numbers he put up last year, and his contract's not that bad for a starting quarterback. It's what, 25 this year, I think 26.
Yeah, something like that. So 2 years left, and as you explained earlier, obviously you walk away clean after 2022, so you can let him go.
I mean, I don't know what it would take for Indy to deal him because, again, you'd be taking that loss there. I can't imagine they get anything higher than like a third for him. Okay. So, I mean, maybe a third, maybe some kind of day 3 pick if they just really want to move on from him. Personally, for me, I would gladly take a 3. A 3 would be nice.
I thought you was about to troll, Zach. Bag of chips.
I would say, 4th, 5th, take the contract and let me just kind of do my thing. But it's tough, man. I was so flip-flop with. I mean, we have a highly volatile quarterback. You're going to sound like you're a flip-flop analyst every week because that's what his game is. But
you gotta go week by week with a guy like him. I respect it.
You do, and the toughest part was you just can't end the season like that. You just can't, it was that bad, man. Like again, I was actually campaigning for him a little bit before that last stretch, and then that last stretch happened, and it cost the team a playoff spot. It's so tough to really know what to do with him at this point, but it's gonna be super interesting for Indy. I really have no clue, because again, I think ego kind of plays a factor in this. Admitting that you just basically burned a first round pick for nothing is tough. But also, after that last 4 games, how do you run it back with him? It's going to be super interesting to see what Indy does. And I think, with this super weak quarterback market, they could be something interesting in terms of like, well, here's an average quarterback for your team. If Indy doesn't want him.
Zach, man, I truly appreciate you hopping on and chop it up, talk a little Carson Wentz for us today. And I figured this is probably, given the way you responded to some things, feel like it was some harsh truths that you had to reveal just for yourself too. So,
yeah.
So I'm gonna take this as a therapy session as we broke down Carson Wentz and things like that. Let the people know where they can find, read, and hear from you, man. Like I've been following you for a minute. You do a great job, man. I'm happy for you in terms of where you've gone with this work. So keep up the good work, but let the people know where they can find, read, and hear from you.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time. It's been like 6 or 7 years at this point. Back when I was the Locked On Skins host for a hot minute there, when I was, fresh out of high school, not knowing what I was doing and all this stuff.
You found your way.
I did, man. I just had to get out of Washington. That was the...
I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about that.
Oh, yeah. But no, you guys can find me on Twitter at Zach Hicks too. I cover the Colts primarily now. Cover a little bit of the Broncos for Sports Illustrated. Do a little bit of work with Cover One. And I used to be Locked On Skins guy a couple, we're getting closer to a decade now. And that was... But yeah, guys, I talk Washington every now and then just because, I still live in the area and I still follow the team, and I'm very happy to say.
Unfortunately, you see some of the games.
Yeah, I see some of the games. I am very happy to say, though, let's go Commies. Let's go Commies.
Oh, man. Look, we got to find a new nickname. I don't know if that's going to sit well. But listen, man, appreciate Zach joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, by the time you get this, your boy will be in Jamaica having a good time. But at the end of the day, stay tuned for more quarterback interviews. Zach kept it real. I think we play the AFC South this year, so definitely we'll hear from Zach again on the pod. Y'all be safe. Enjoy y'all day. Enjoy y'all evening, y'all morning, whenever you're listening to this. And we are out of here. Peace.